My name is Maya Whitaker. I'm 29 years old and I work in software development. 3 years with someone can convince you that your future is already written. It can make you believe the house, the kids, the Sunday grocery runs, all of it is simply waiting for the right timing. That illusion shattered at a family barbecue. The afternoon looked harmless. Sunlight pouring over a crowded backyard, burgers on the grill, kids sprinting through a sprinkler like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. I was holding 2 plates when his uncle asked the question. So, he boomed across the yard, beer in hand, when are you finally getting married and settling down? A few people turned toward us automatically, smiles forming, expectation in the air. My boyfriend laughed. Not awkward, not nervous, easy. Then he pointed at me and said, Marriage with her? No, I'm not getting married. The words didn't echo. They landed. Flat, casual, certain. I felt every syllable like a bruise forming under my skin. His uncle blinked. Wait, I thought... Yeah, no, he said lightly. Not really the marriage type. You know me. I stood there holding both plates. Potato salad, coleslaw, a burger sliding toward the edge. Everything else kept moving. The sprinkler clicking, a kid shrieking, a puppy barking. But the sound around me dulled, like someone had pushed my head underwater. Because we had talked about marriage. Not vaguely. Not jokingly. He had been the one leaving wedding magazines on the coffee table, open to certain pages. Dog-eared. Intentional. He had been the one scrolling venue websites late at night. Just looking, he'd say, for when we're ready. And I was ready. Months ago, while putting laundry away, I found a small blue jewelry box tucked deep in his sock drawer. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. A ring sat inside. Simple, elegant, catching light even in the dim bedroom. I remember standing there with it in my hand, heart pounding, feeling like I was holding proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined our future. I closed the box, put it back exactly where it was. Never said a word. I wanted him to have his moment. Instead, he erased it in front of his entire family. He finally looked at me and saw my face. Babe, I handed him one of the plates. I'm going to grab something from the car, I said. My voice sounded calm. It wasn't. I didn't go to the car. I walked around the side of the house, past the trash cans, into the front yard. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just what he said. It was how naturally it came out of him. Like marrying me wasn't even a serious possibility. I pulled out my phone, opened his contact, stared at his name for a full minute. Then I blocked his number. No speech. No scene. Just silence. I went back inside through the front door. His mom was slicing watermelon. Leaving already, sweetheart? Not feeling great, I said. Tell him I took an Uber. I didn't take an Uber. I drove home in complete silence. When I got to our apartment, I packed a bag. Clothes, laptop, chargers. Then I opened his sock drawer again. The blue box was still there. I held it in my palm. For a second, grief hit so hard it felt physical. Then I put it back exactly where it had been. Not for revenge. For clarity. Because I knew something didn't add up. And I wasn't done finding out what it was. I locked the door and drove to my brother's place across town. He opened the door, saw my face, and stepped aside. Can I stay here for a few days? He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. That night I didn't sleep. I lay on my brother's couch, staring at the ceiling fan, watching it rotate in slow, indifferent circles while my brain replayed the same 5 seconds on a loop. His laugh. The point. No, I'm not getting married. And the worst part? He didn't say it like a mistake. He said it like the truth. By morning, the numbness had settled in. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was surgical. When I finally picked up my phone, I almost forgot I'd blocked him. Almost. My personal phone was quiet. My work phone wasn't. 17 missed calls. 43 texts. All from him. The first ones were confused. Where did you go? Are you okay? Your car is gone. Then irritated. You're really not going to talk to me about this? This is so immature? Then angry. You blocked me? Seriously? Over a joke? And finally, please call me. I don't understand what's happening. Can we just talk? I read them once. Only once. Then I turned the phone face down and went to work. I'm usually the one who cracks jokes during stand-ups, the one who brings donuts on Fridays and teases the back-end team for their naming conventions. That Monday, I barely spoke. I sat in my cubicle staring at code that made perfect sense, logically structured, properly formatted, and I couldn't focus long enough to debug a simple issue. You good? Aaron asked, leaning over the divider. He's the kind of coworker who notices everything and says very little. Fine, I replied. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Didn't. He studied me for a second like he wanted to push further, then nodded and backed off. Smart man. By lunch, my direct office line rang. I knew before I looked. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail. Again. Voicemail. 6 times. Each time my pulse stayed steady. That surprised me. I expected shaking hands, tears, anger. Instead, I felt controlled, like something inside me had shifted from heartbreak to assessment. At some point between the barbecue and that Monday morning, a question had embedded itself in my head. If he didn't mean what he said, why did it sound so honest? Around 3 that afternoon, I opened one voicemail. Just one. His voice came through uneven, strained. Maya, please, it was a joke. I panicked. Uncle Rick put me on the spot. You know how he is. I didn't mean it like that. Didn't mean it like what? Like he didn't want to marry me? Or like he didn't want to admit that publicly? There's a difference. I deleted the voicemail. The next message came seconds later. I know you're listening. Please don't do this. Don't do what? React to what he said? Believe him? By the end of the workday, everyone knew something was off. Nobody asked directly. But people looked at me differently, like they could sense something had cracked. When I got back to my brother's place, he was sitting on the couch with takeout containers spread across the coffee table. Figured you weren't cooking, he said. I sat down across from him. He's been calling all day. You answering? No. He nodded once. Good. I stared at the lo mein in my hands, but didn't take a bite. He said it was a joke. My brother didn't even look up. Was it funny? I exhaled a humorless breath. No. Then it wasn't a joke. Silence settled between us, thick but not uncomfortable. After a minute, he added, You found the ring, didn't you? My head snapped up. How do you... You told me 6 months ago you thought something was up. You don't miss details. He wasn't wrong. I'd mentioned the magazines, the venue tabs, the way he'd started asking subtle questions about my ring size. I found it months ago, I admitted, in his sock drawer. And nothing. I put it back. My brother leaned back, processing. So he buys a ring, plans something, then tells his entire family he's not getting married. When he said it like that, stripped of emotion, it sounded absurd. Contradictory. Broken logic. Unless both things were true. Unless he loved the idea of proposing in private, but feared the permanence of it in public. That thought unsettled me more than the humiliation, because it meant the problem wasn't embarrassment. It was conviction. My phone buzzed again. Another text. Please just meet me. I need to explain. Explain what? That he hadn't decided yet? That I was a placeholder while he figured himself out? I typed 3 words. There's nothing to explain. Then I erased them. Silence felt stronger. That night, I lay awake again. But this time my thoughts weren't chaotic. They were methodical. 3 years. Living together. Future planning. A ring hidden in a drawer. And yet when the simplest question came, when are you getting married? His instinct wasn't yes. It wasn't soon. It wasn't someday. It was no. Clear. Immediate. Unfiltered. That's what I couldn't shake. Because panic still reveals something. And what it revealed wasn't hesitation. It was resistance. By the second day, the calls slowed. By the third, they stopped entirely. And that silence should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the calm before something else. I didn't know it yet. But 2 days after the barbecue, he was going to walk into my office lobby with his uncle standing beside him, holding something in his hands that would make every single person in that building stop pretending not to stare. 2 days after the barbecue, I was in the middle of a sprint review when the conference room door opened. Our receptionist leaned in, hesitant. Sorry to interrupt, Maya. Someone's here to see you. Says it's urgent. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. Clients don't show up unannounced. I stepped into the hallway, and there he was. Standing in the lobby like this was normal. Like we hadn't detonated 3 years in a backyard full of witnesses. He wasn't alone. Uncle Rick stood beside him, hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. And in my boyfriend's hands, a small blue jewelry box. For half a second, the world narrowed to that box. He saw me stop walking. Maya, he said, voice tight, please. Every receptionist, every intern, every coworker pretending to refill their water bottle suddenly found something fascinating in our direction. How did you... I went by the apartment, he admitted quickly. The spare key was still under the mat. I needed to understand. Uncle Rick cleared his throat, uncomfortable. I drove him, he muttered. He was pretty upset. Pretty upset. I almost laughed. Outside, I said evenly. We walked to the parking lot. Rick stayed near the building entrance, giving us distance but not privacy. The sun hit the pavement hard, bright, exposing. He opened the box. The ring caught the light instantly, scattering tiny rainbows against the asphalt. You found it, he said quietly. That's not a question. I was going to propose, he rushed. September, our anniversary trip. The beach reservation? That wasn't random. I knew. That almost made it worse. You were going to propose, I repeated. Yeah. Then why did you tell your entire family you weren't getting married? He flinched. I panicked. Panicked. Rick put me on the spot. Everyone was looking at me. I said the first thing that came out. The first thing, I repeated slowly, was no. It was a joke. It wasn't funny. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? He hesitated. There it was. That half-second delay. The same one that had echoed in my head for 2 nights straight. I don't like public pressure, he said. You know that. You've been leaving wedding magazines open on the coffee table for a year. I know. You've sent me Pinterest boards of centerpieces. I know. You bought a ring. Yes. Then why does marriage sound like a threat when someone else says it out loud? His jaw tightened. It's not a threat. It looked like one. He ran a hand through his hair, a tell I'd learned early in our relationship. He did that when he didn't want to answer directly. You embarrass me, I said quietly. That wasn't my intention. But it was the result. He swallowed. I love you. Do you want to marry me? The question hung there. Simple, direct, clean. He didn't answer immediately. The pause was microscopic, but I felt it like an earthquake. It's complicated, he said. I laughed. Actually laughed. That's not complicated. That's a no. It's not a no. Then what is it? He looked at the ring in his hand like it could save him. There's things I need to figure out. Like what? My career. Whether I want to stay in this city long term. Kids. I don't even know if I want kids. We've talked about kids. Not seriously. We've been together 3 years. He exhaled hard. I just don't want to rush into something permanent without being sure. And I do? My voice sharpened before I could soften it. You think I want a proposal from someone who's half in? That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? Silence. And that silence told me more than anything else. He held up the ring box toward me. Take it, he said. Propose when you're ready. I'll say yes, I promise. The audacity of that almost stunned me. You'd say yes because you feel guilty, I said evenly. Not because you're certain. That's not true, isn't it? I stepped closer so he couldn't look away. If Rick hadn't asked that question, if I hadn't walked out, would you have ever told me you weren't sure? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I nodded once. That's what I thought. I turned toward the building. Maya, wait. What do you want me to do? I asked without facing him. Pretend you didn't humiliate me? Pretend you didn't just admit you're not sure you even want the same life? I want you to fight for us. I stopped walking. I was fighting for us, I said quietly. I was all in. He stared at me like that realization had just hit him. You're the one who wasn't. I walked back inside. No dramatic exit. No tears. Just controlled steps across tile flooring, while the office tried very hard not to watch. An hour later, my work phone rang. Uncle Rick, I feel responsible, he said immediately. I shouldn't have asked like that. It's not your fault. He really does love you, you know. He talked about you the whole drive. Love isn't the issue. He's devastated. He'll survive. There was a pause. And you? Rick asked gently. I looked down at my hand. I just realized something. I never took the ring. It was still in his hand when I walked away. I will, I said. And for the first time since the barbecue, I wasn't sure if that was true. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the ring in his hand. Not because I wanted it, because I realized something unsettling. He didn't bring it to that backyard. He brought it to my workplace. After. Not as a promise. As proof. As something he could hold up once he realized I was serious. I was sitting on my brother's couch when he came in with 2 beers and dropped one on the coffee table in front of me. You saw him, didn't you? Yeah. He sat down across from me. And? He was going to propose. My brother blinked. Was? September beach anniversary trip. And he told his family he wasn't getting married. Yes. He leaned back slowly. That doesn't track. That's what I said. Silence stretched. Did you ask him? My brother pressed. If he wants to marry me? Yes. And? He said it's complicated. My brother actually laughed. Complicated is what people say when they don't want to say no. I stared at the floor. He said he needs to figure things out. Career, city, kids. You've lived together for 3 years. I know. The more I repeated it out loud, the less sense it made. Because here's what people don't talk about. It's not the rejection that breaks you. It's the realization that you were building something alone. That every time he said someday, he meant maybe. And maybe was enough to keep me investing. The next few days were quiet. No calls. No texts. The silence should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt unfinished. Like there was a file still running in the background. A week passed. I went back to the gym for the first time since everything happened. Routine felt necessary. Movement felt grounding. I was halfway through a treadmill run when I saw him in the mirror. Not my boyfriend. His best friend. Ethan. Arms crossed near the weight racks, watching me like he'd been waiting. I finished my mile, walked straight toward him. We need to talk, he said. I disagree. He's not eating. I froze. He? I repeated. Your boyfriend, Ethan clarified quickly. He hasn't slept. He's a mess. That's not my responsibility. You don't even want to know why he said it? He told me. He panicked. That's not the whole story. I exhaled sharply. Fine, enlighten me. Ethan looked around like he was deciding how much to say. His parents almost divorced last year. I blinked. What? His dad had an affair. The words hit differently than I expected. He never told me. He didn't tell anyone, Ethan said. Found out 3 days before you two moved in together. He asked us not to mention it. I stared at him. That makes no sense. It does if you saw what he saw. Ethan's voice softened. His mom didn't just cry, Maya. She collapsed. Couldn't get out of bed for weeks. He was the one driving her to therapy. He was the one picking up groceries while pretending everything was fine. I swallowed. He never said a word. He thought if he didn't talk about it, it wouldn't bleed into your relationship. A slow, uncomfortable understanding started forming. So marriage feels dangerous to him. He's terrified, Ethan said plainly. Terrified of becoming his dad. Or worse, watching you fall apart like his mom did. I'm not his mother. He knows that logically. Trauma isn't logical. I hated how that sentence made sense. He humiliated me, I said. I know. He let me plan a future he wasn't sure he wanted. I know. Ethan stepped closer. He loves you. That part isn't complicated. But the rest is. Yes. We stood there in the hum of treadmills and clanking weights. Is he getting help? I asked quietly. Ethan hesitated. He's looking into therapy. Looking into. Not going. Looking into. And what exactly am I supposed to do with this information? I asked. I don't know, Ethan admitted. But at least now you know it wasn't about you not being enough. That part hit somewhere deeper than I expected. Because if I was honest, a tiny, vicious voice had whispered that maybe he didn't want to marry me specifically. That maybe I was the hesitation. I drove home that night, replaying everything through a new lens. The way he changed the subject when his parents came up. How he tensed when his mom called. The time he cried during a movie about infidelity and brushed it off as just tired. The signs had been there. I just hadn't connected them. But understanding something doesn't erase what it cost. He still laughed. He still pointed. He still said no. And trauma might explain the reaction, but it didn't excuse the humiliation. When I walked into my brother's apartment, he looked up from the couch. You saw someone, he said immediately. His best friend. And? His dad cheated. His parents almost divorced. My brother's jaw tightened. And that gives him permission to throw you under a bus? No. Exactly. I sat down slowly. He's scared. So he embarrasses you publicly? That's not fair. What's not fair, my brother said evenly, is you being collateral damage for someone else's unresolved issues. Silence settled between us again. But this time it wasn't numb. It was heavy. Because now I understood the why. But I still had to decide what to do with it. And that's when the most dangerous thought entered my head. What if he wasn't lying? What if he really did love me and just didn't know how to not destroy it? Understanding is dangerous. It softens edges that were protecting you. After Ethan told me about the affair, my anger didn't disappear. It just shifted. It became heavier, less sharp, more complicated. And suddenly, memories started rearranging themselves. The way he used to stiffen whenever his mom called. How he'd casually say, "Marriage changes people," then laugh like it was a throwaway line. The night we watched a movie where the husband cheated, and he got up halfway through and said he wasn't in the mood anymore. I thought he was just tired. Now I wondered what he was reliving. That didn't erase the barbecue. But it did make it harder to paint him as a villain, which would have been easier. Villains are clean. Trauma isn't? A few days later, I met up with 2 college friends for dinner. They asked about him almost immediately. We broke up, I said simply. They winced in sympathy. What happened? One of them asked. He wasn't ready for what I wanted. That was the clean version, the socially acceptable summary. They nodded. Conversation moved on. But as we walked to the parking lot afterward, Tyler, who'd gone through a brutal breakup 2 years ago, slowed his pace beside me. My ex did something similar, he said. Kept talking about the future. Every time I brought up commitment, she'd say, soon. Soon never came. How'd you know when to walk away? He shrugged. When I realized I was in love with the version of her I kept imagining, not the one standing in front of me. That sentence followed me home. Was I in love with him? Or with the man who bought a ring and opened wedding magazines? Because both existed. And that duality was exhausting. That night, my brother found me staring at the ceiling again. You're thinking about taking him back, he said. I'm thinking, I corrected. Same thing. I don't know if I could trust him. Trust can be rebuilt. Not always. He sat down across from me. Are you still angry? I paused. The humiliation still burned. But the rage had cooled. I'm hurt, I admitted. That's different. He leaned forward slightly. You remember when Sarah left me? He asked. His divorce 5 years ago had nearly broken him. Yeah, you told me something that stuck. I don't remember what I said. You said if you still love her when you're not angry anymore, then it was real. I swallowed. And? Are you not angry anymore? I thought about the parking lot. The hesitation before he said complicated. The ring catching sunlight. The way his voice cracked when I walked away. No, I said quietly. I'm still angry. Then you're not ready, my brother replied. The next morning, I woke up to something unexpected. An email, not a text, not a call. An email. Subject line, I won't call again. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. It was short. No theatrics. No begging. I started therapy this week, twice a week. I didn't tell you about my dad because I thought I could outgrow the fear. I thought if I bought the ring and planned everything, I'd force myself to be brave. That was unfair to you. I'm not asking you to come back. I just need you to know it wasn't about not wanting you. It was about not knowing how to promise forever without panicking. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop. Therapy. Not looking into. Not thinking about. Actually going. That changed something. It didn't undo what happened, but it shifted the narrative. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since the barbecue. I opened the drawer in my brother's guest room where I'd left my spare things. I stared at the empty space for a long time, because the jewelry box wasn't there anymore. My stomach tightened. He must have gone back to the apartment after I left. Found it where it had always been. Took it, not to punish me, to prove something to himself. A few days later, I saw him for the first time since the office parking lot. Not planned. Not dramatic. I was at a coffee shop downtown, laptop open, trying to focus. He walked in. He looked thinner, quieter, different, like someone who'd been forced to look at himself without distraction. For a split second, our eyes almost met. I looked down first. I didn't leave. But I didn't approach either. Because here's the truth I was slowly accepting. Understanding someone's pain doesn't obligate you to endure it. He finished his coffee and left. And I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not anger, not longing, clarity. But clarity doesn't mean easy. It just means honest. And honesty was about to get even more complicated. 3 weeks after the barbecue, a handwritten letter showed up at my brother's apartment. Not a text, not another email. An actual envelope with my name written in his handwriting. Careful, deliberate, like he was afraid of getting even that wrong. I almost didn't open it. Curiosity won. Maya, I'm not writing this to get you back. That line alone made my chest tighten. Because if he'd begged, it would have been easier to dismiss. He didn't. I started therapy twice a week. Dr. Kaplan says I have unresolved trauma tied to my dad's affair and an unhealthy fear of permanence. I found out about the affair 3 days before we moved in together. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to poison what we had. I thought if I ignored it, it wouldn't follow me into our future. That was selfish. I stopped there for a moment. 3 days before we signed a lease together. 3 days before we unpacked boxes and toasted cheap champagne on the living room floor. He had known his parents' marriage was collapsing, and he chose silence. I kept reading. I bought the ring because I love you. I planned September because I wanted to be the man who wasn't afraid. But when Rick asked that question in front of everyone, I wasn't the brave version of myself. I was the scared kid watching his mom cry in the bathroom. That doesn't excuse what I did. It explains it. There it was again. Explanation, not excuse. I don't blame you for leaving. I don't expect you to wait. I just need you to know you didn't imagine our future. I did want it. I was just terrified of surviving it. The last line was underlined. I'm working on not being that man anymore. No dramatic plea. No, please come back. Just accountability. I folded the letter slowly, and for the first time since everything happened, my anger cooled into something else. Grief. Not for what was, for what could have been. That night, my brother found me sitting on the floor with the letter beside me. You heard from him, he said. Yeah. Begging? No. Good. He's in therapy. My brother didn't react immediately. Actually going? Twice a week? He nodded once. That's something. It is. Silence stretched between us. You still love him, he said eventually. It wasn't a question. Yes. Is that enough? That was the question. And I didn't have an answer. Because loving someone and trusting them are not the same thing. Over the next few weeks, the intensity faded. Not the memory, but the sharpness. I moved into my own apartment, small 1-bedroom downtown, neutral walls, clean slate. The first night there, I didn't unpack anything sentimental. I didn't need to. It wasn't about the ring anymore. It was about readiness. I went on a few dates. They were fine. Polite conversations. Safe laughs. No electricity. No history. No complicated silences. Just neutral. And neutral is peaceful. but it isn't love. One afternoon, 2 months after the barbecue, I saw him again. Coffee shop. Different one this time. He was sitting alone, notebook open, pen in hand. He looked steadier, not lighter, but grounded, like someone rebuilding himself piece by piece. This time he saw me. We held eye contact for a few seconds. He didn't approach. He just nodded. Small, respectful, and that told me something important. He was finally learning not to chase control. I left first. Not because I was running, because I was choosing. And here's what I finally understood. Walking away from someone you love is brutal. But staying with someone who isn't sure they can choose you, that's slower. That's corrosive. 3 months after the barbecue, my life looked normal again. New apartment, new routine, new silence. I stopped checking my phone for messages that weren't coming. He kept his word. No calls, no surprise visits, no emotional ambushes. The restraint told me therapy wasn't just something he wrote to impress me. It was something he was actually doing, and that almost made it harder. Because it would have been easier if he'd spiraled. If he'd blamed me. If he'd tried to twist the story into something where I overreacted. He didn't. He owned it. That maturity came too late. But it still mattered. One night, my brother came over to help me hang curtains. We stood in my living room, surrounded by half-assembled furniture and unopened boxes. You regret it? He asked casually. Walking away? Yeah. I didn't answer immediately. Some days I missed him so sharply it felt like muscle memory. The way he'd reach for my hand absent-mindedly. The way he'd narrate cooking like he was hosting a cooking show. The way he'd always steal the blankets and pretend he hadn't. But then I'd remember the barbecue. The laugh. The point. No. That single word had cracked something fundamental. I don't regret choosing myself, I finally said. That's not what I asked. I sighed. I regret that it had to happen that way. He nodded. Fair. A week later, something unexpected happened. A package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was the blue jewelry box. And a small folded note. I never gave you this. It belongs to you now. D. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Not as leverage. Not as bait. As something finished. That night, I did something I hadn't done before. I drove to the jewelry store where he'd bought it. The saleswoman recognized it immediately. Return? She asked gently. I hesitated. For a split second, I imagined holding on to it. As a reminder. As a what if. Then I shook my head. Yes. She processed the refund quietly. No judgment. No commentary. Just closure. When the transaction finished, I felt lighter. Not because I got the money back. Because I let go of the fantasy. Later that week, I saw him one last time. Not at a coffee shop. Not accidentally. He was walking out of his therapist's office as I passed by on the sidewalk. Pure coincidence. He stopped. So did I. There was no dramatic tension. No unresolved electricity. Just two people who once loved each other deeply and survived it. You look good, he said. So do you. A pause. Not awkward. Just real. I'm sorry, he added quietly. Again. Not for loving you. For not being ready to protect what we had. That was new. Not just fear. Responsibility. I hope therapy helps, I said. It is. Another pause. If things were different, he started. I shook my head gently. They weren't. He nodded. He understood. That was the final shift. We didn't need a reunion. We needed resolution. As I walked away, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hopeful either. I was done. And being done isn't loud. It's steady. That night, I stood in my apartment alone, curtains finally hung, city lights filtering through clean glass. I thought about the barbecue, about the girl holding 2 plates, shocked and silent. If I could speak to her now, I wouldn't tell her to stay. I wouldn't tell her to fight harder. I'd tell her this. When someone hesitates to choose you publicly, believe them the first time. Love is brave. Fear is loud. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away before you become someone's compromise.